through the class, I am expecting that from this point out, when you come into class, you will start greeting one another in Spanish. This is the only way you're going to learn it, is if you keep doing it. So we need to start doing it, same as we've been doing the Our Father, the Hail Mary. We need to really delve into this and get moving on it, okay? So, Espanol greetings. I don't have all the vocabulary. The other thing I wanted to say is I'm going to email you the alphabet. I know I did it before. Years ago. So, anyway, as soon as you learn that alphabet, when you look at a Spanish word, you should be able to say it because the pronunciation of those letters doesn't change. It's the same all the time. So if you pay attention to the letters, and every letter is sounded in a Spanish word, whereas we may have a silent letter periodically, every letter is sounded. And you need to pay close attention that you're not doing English Spanish. So I hear a lot of octubre when it's octubre. So pay attention to your vowels, okay? Yes, it's important that we just keep moving along, but it's also good if we try to do it as correctly as we can, okay? So I just really want to encourage you, just like Jason did, just keep at it, keep working at it. We're going to keep going. You should have seen what the bishop's eyes when he said, oh yes, and I know that this current class is getting much more Spanish. So you've got to stand before the bishop and say, sí, obispo. So, the only other piece I have is that we're coming up on our next seminar. Just found out recently that Alberto was assigned morning prayer and snack that morning. Alberto needs to be with his other program. So I'm wondering if someone else who has morning prayer and snack on Saturday would be willing to switch with him. We cannot have him do it on December 12th, and we cannot have him do it on March 12th. But any of the other ones, January 9th is David, February 13th is Jim, April 9th is Brian, and May 14th is Dwayne. You'll do it. So I'll tell him he has February 13th. The snack for that day is Ed, LaRoche, or Dwayne. Are you willing to switch to November? Dwayne or Ed?
I'll switch.
Okay. Muchas gracias.
She's not here.
There you go. The women are outdoing you, gentlemen. I said muchas gracias.
That's why we bring them along.
And they said de nada, which is? Thank you. Welcome. Yes, Dwayne.
Yeah, just wanted to thank everybody for their prayers and intentions and thoughts during this time. It's very comforting to know that and to hear that. And just wanted to acknowledge that. Doesn't look like there'll be a funeral per se. My mom is a private person, doesn't want to do that. But by the same token, we've been inviting her up here for a while and she hasn't wanted to come here. But since things have changed, I think that will change and she will come visit us. And perhaps during that time, we might have a service during that time. Just wanted to thank everybody.
So do we solve the Alberto thing I was looking at?
It is solved, yes. He's gonna, Jim Bauer is gonna move up to November, and Ed LaRoche is gonna move up to November, and we'll move him to February. So, anything else for the good of the cause?
Charlie, your father.
Hola, mis amigos. ¿Cómo están? Everybody else is muy mal. All you have to say is soy gringo. How did you find the reading from last week? All about suffering. So we did a little more suffering tonight. So in this chapter, Dr. Ralph Martin is talking about a deeper purification. And although we can attempt to purify ourselves of these sins and their effects, our own effects can only accomplish so much, he says. And it's God, and He has to do the rest. And to do that, He uses some exterior trials and interior trials. And these are not optional, because we either have these trials here on earth, or we go through them in purgatory. And he has this beautiful quote on the bottom of page 351 that I thought was very nice. He said, "This purification isn't optional, it's necessary. It's not a question of if, but when. If the purification doesn't take place in this life, it will have to happen in purgatory if we are to be able to see God. We also should recall that the sooner this purification takes place, the better for us, and it's better for us and for everyone else in our life. The root of all our unhappiness is the result of sin and its effects. The sooner we are free from the distortions and crippling of sin, the sooner we will experience a fuller joy and freedom as sons and daughters of God, and be able more and more to be a blessing to others." And in this chapter, he gives us some examples of exterior trials like illness and pain, persecution, poverty, misunderstandings from other people around us, and rejection. And then for interior trials, there is that feeling of abandonment by God. There is this arity in prayer that just goes on and doesn't seem to go away. We just feel very dry. It's not something that we want to do. And then there's also this profound awareness of our own sinfulness and our brokenness. And during this purification or these trials, it might feel like God is absent, but He's there just as close as He's always been. We just can't perceive His presence. We don't have that sign of His consolation, but He's still guiding us, and He's still there giving us His strength to endure. Now, I've been reading this book by Jacques Philippe. Have any of you heard of Jacques Philippe? He is a French priest, and he's sort of an expert on Saint Therese of Lisieux. And he once gave a retreat based on the diary of Saint Therese. And towards the back of the very last retreat, he talks about the different trials that we might go through. And he talks about how when we have these trials, it's always an opportunity for us to grow in either our faith, our hope, or our love. It might be just one of those virtues that we are being called to grow in, or it might be a little bit of each virtue that we need to grow in. So in every trial that God allows us to have, we need to look at it and discern, well, am I being called to grow in faith? Am I being called to grow in hope? Or am I being called to grow in love? love for God, love for neighbor, and maybe even love for my own self. You know, I think that Father Jacques Philippe just writes very beautifully, and so I have this, it's it's just a few pages, and so it's just going to be a little bit of story time with Father Increase, so just kind of listen to it. So he begins, and I do have a copy of this chapter for you afterwards if you want to look at it again, or maybe even pick up a copy yourself. I did give a copy of this for all the seminarians, and a few of them did use it on a retreat before they were ordained as deacons, so it might be something to consider. Every trial, no matter what it causes and characteristics are, is a trial of faith, or of hope, or of love. All three aspects usually are involved with a particular stress on one or the other. Every trial is a trial of faith. See this time of trial as a call to have a more determined, mature, and adult faith. The specific question we are faced with: what is God doing? Is He really faithful? Can He draw good out of what is happening? Is simply a question of faith. We are invited to respond by deciding to have faith. I believe. I continue to trust God, even though I can't see, even though I don't feel anything, even though appearances are all against it. I decide to believe. I will believe that God is faithful, that He will not let me fall, that He can draw something positive out of everything that is happening to me. Every trial is a trial of hope. This is closely linked to what I've just said about faith, but there are some important points to add. When we are having a difficult time, one of the questions that comes up is this: in this painful experience, what do we rely on? What are we counting on? In what or in whom do we place our hope? How are we thinking of getting out of it? The answer we're invited to give is: I'm counting on the Lord. I'm expecting help from Him. That doesn't mean I'm not going to apply all the human resources available, but at the very deepest level, I abandon myself into God's hands, and it is in Him that I hope. Thirdly, every trial is a trial of love. Perhaps our relationship with God is in crisis, or perhaps our relationship with our neighbor, in our marriage, for instance. But often the difficulty also concerns our relationship with ourselves, our love for ourselves. For example, sometimes we may lose a taste for prayer. What does this trial mean? It is a call to continue praying all the same, because we don't pray just because we enjoy it or experience satisfaction, but first and foremost to please God. When we find great pleasure in it, that's fine. But when prayer is difficult, we need to keep going just the same. That purifies our love for God, which becomes freer, more disinterested, more genuine, and not just a selfish search for ourselves. It's similar in what concerns our relationship with our neighbor. You loved your wife when she was young, pretty, well-behaved, pleasant, and answered all your expectations. Now you notice that she is sometimes bad-tempered, that she has a few wrinkles. Do you continue to love her? Do you love her for yourself? Or do you love her truly with a love that consists of wanting her good, and not only seeking your own satisfaction? We are constantly faced with this kind of trial, in which we confront the demands of loving another person as he or she is, loving them freely and disinterestedly, forgiving them, etc. But sometimes our love for ourselves is called into question. We saw this before. You loved yourself when you were satisfied with yourself, when everything was going well. But now, seeing your inner poverty and sinfulness, you begin to hate yourself. No. Accept yourself in all your poverty and limitations. What act of faith am I being invited to make in this situation? What attitude of hope am I being called to live by? And what conversion in relation to love, leading to a love that is truer and pure, am I being summoned to undertake? And then later on, he gives an example from St. Theresa's own life, and it talks about her temptations against faith. When she was dying, probably that last year of her life, she had these awful temptations against faith in heaven. She was having these temptations where she was thinking, oh, it's just darkness. When I die, it's just darkness. There's nothing there. And she writes about this in her autobiography. And she writes about how she is willing to go through that, to free herself of any attachments she might still have, and to offer it up for atheists. And so just a little bit more. There was a wonderful example of this at the end of her life. For about 1.5 years before her death, Therese lived in the deepest interior darkness. She had always taken enormous joy in thinking of heaven and the happiness that was to come, and in believing in Jesus. But from Easter 1896, everything became difficult and dark. Jesus has permitted my soul to be invaded by the deepest darkness, and that the thought of heaven, that had always been so sweet to me, should bring me nothing but struggle and torment. She never lost her faith, but faith itself became a painful struggle. And she wrote, "When in my poems I sing of the happiness of heaven, I feel no joy in it at all, for I am only singing of what I want to believe." She wrote out the creed in her blood and carried it next to her heart. She was assailed by doubts and temptations of every kind. God does not exist. Everything you've believed and rejoiced in is nothing but illusion. After death, you will fall into nothingness. Science holds the explanation for everything. It was a very painful fight, but fight she did. What's very moving is the meaning of all. What's very moving is the meaning all this took on for her. She accepted it as a purification of whatever elements of her hope in heaven might be overly human, and above all, as an invitation to pray for atheists. She lived in a time when triumphalist atheism was flourishing and very secure of itself. Many people really thought religion was finished and science had taken its place and would provide the explanation for everything. Science, it was thought, had all the answers, and the happiness of mankind would be the necessary result of scientific progress. All the great illusions of late 19th century atheism. Therese sensed that she was being called to offer up her suffering for all who had no faith. She said, "Your child asks you for forgiveness for her brothers and sisters. She consents to eat the bread of sorrow for as long as you wish, and will not leave the table heaped with bitterness at which poor sinners eat, before the day you shall appoint. May all those who are not yet enlightened by the radiant torch of faith finally see it shining." Speaking of her dryness and darkness in prayer some years before in one of her letters to her sister, she had already said, "May my darkness serve to enlighten other souls. In other words, I accept being in darkness. I have faith, and that is enough for me. I don't need proofs. I don't need ecstasies. Faith is enough for me. I accept this subterranean darkness in which I am plunged, asking God to enlighten others who don't have the grace of faith or who refuse it. Every trial can have a meaning, but we can't invent one for it. We can't place made-up labels on things from outside. Sometimes we're too quick and too superficial in interpreting events. It doesn't help people to say, if you're undergoing this trial, it's because God wants to tell you this, or is asking you this, or to do this." And at the very end of this chapter, Father Philippe says that sometimes we are given these trials in our lives so that we can better explain it to someone else. We can be a better friend. We can be a better support. And I know that's true in my own life. Going through something that just causes me to suffer has helped me later on in my ministry. It's made me a better listener. It's made me better able to empathize with them and to sympathize. So suffering is never wasted as long as we go into it with the right attitude. Any questions on that?
Can one grow without suffering? I mean, I know the suffering eventually comes, but can one grow without suffering?
I think so. Because even the Blessed Virgin Mary suffered. I mean, she was without sin. We can do our suffering here on earth and avoid purgatory. St. John of the Cross once said that there's enough suffering on earth that if we approach it with the right attitude, when we die, we can just go straight to heaven. And that should be our goal. Heaven should be the goal, not purgatory. Because if you miss heaven, you go to purgatory. If you miss purgatory, you go to hell. So that's our goal. Our goal should be heaven. So any suffering that comes your way, receive it. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean you don't go to doctors, you don't try to seek help in the normal human ways. But a lot of times, sometimes we're stuck. So we try to see what God wants out of that suffering. And St. Teresa of Avila and St. Catherine of Siena, they talk about that. And they talk about a lot of times God just wants us to turn to Him with a greater trust and a greater faith. And in the chapter, I won't read them, but they write some very beautiful things about God wanting us to turn back to Him. He is our Now, it seems like we're doing a lot of Ignatian spirituality with this video series. And so, have any of you ever done discernment of spirits? Saint Ignatius, did you go through all the 14 rules? So I was just going to go through the rules with you a little bit. And these rules are meant to help us in our spiritual life. And there are 14 different rules. And in one of the courses I took, we went through the rules. And Saint Ignatius is, I think he's a brilliant priest and a brilliant saint. And so we're just going to go through the first 4 rules right now. Yeah, this is Timothy Gallagher. Because I gave you he wrote a book on the examen prayer that we did last time. And so he also wrote a book on all the rules. Very good book. I recommend it.
Yeah, I've got it. It's one of those things where you have to like almost go through it every year
Yeah.
and read it because
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah. So you read it, you memorized everything?
Yeah, I didn't know. I just said like, seems like we need to refresh your memory.
Okay, so rule 1. Nobody here is in rule 1. Okay, the first rule. In persons who are going from mortal sin to mortal sin, the enemy is ordinarily accustomed to propose apparent pleasure to them, leading them to imagine sensual delights and pleasures in order to hold them more and make them grow in their vices and sins. In these persons, the good spirit uses a contrary method, stinging and biting their conscience through their rational power of moral judgment. So rule 1, this is an orientation where somebody is just going away from God. We have God here. Our person, they are going that way, away from God. And when we speak of the enemy can be Satan that's drawing us away. It can be demonic spirits that draw us away. It can be our own attraction to sin that draws us away. It can be our habits, our vices that draw us away. Or it can even be the culture around us that just draws us away from God. And then when we look at the Bible, we see King Ahab as an example of someone who is living rule one. As we remember, King Ahab worshipped Baal, and he was a murderer. And so he was going from mortal sin to mortal sin, just going from bad to worse, and always moving away from God. The enemy was pushing him, and this was very easy on a person's part. But the good spirit operates in the conscience, and the good spirit operates on this person with a biting or a stinging, and it's meant to make the person uncomfortable. And so the good spirit would be the Trinity, maybe the Holy Spirit, angels, saints, our witnesses of faith that are in our lives, like family members, anything that would move us towards God. Those would be considered the good spirit. And so the good spirit is trying to push us in the opposite direction towards God by kind of stinging the conscience. The bad spirit makes everything pleasurable, makes everything good, everything that would move us away from God. And that's rule one. Now, when you do the spiritual exercises and you are looking at these rules, if someone is in rule one, you just stop. The rest of the rules apply to people that are moving towards God. So if you're in rule one, the rest of the rules don't apply to you. So rule two. So in rule two, the person is moving towards God. This doesn't mean he's perfect, but he's very sincere in his effort at loving God. And so in this situation, the evil one tries to keep us from taking that very first step towards God. And my teacher gave the example of Mother Teresa. What if she had ignored that call within a call? What if she had listened to those temptations that said, oh, you can't do this. Don't do it. Don't consider it. So the evil one always tries to keep us from making that step. And also in this rule, the enemy always tries to frustrate us, because this love that God has for us is so lavish, and he doesn't want that relationship between us and God. The second rule. In persons who are going on intensely purifying their sins and rising from good to better in the service of God our Lord, the method is contrary to that of the first rule. For then it is proper to the evil spirit to bite, sadden, and place obstacles, disquieting with false reasons, so that the person may not go forward. And it is proper to the good spirit to give courage and strength, consolations, tears, inspirations, and quiet easing, and taking away all obstacles, so that the person may go forward in doing good.
Father?
Yeah.
I don't have the book, so,
I'll give a copy of that too.
the words that you're reading, those are.
That's Saint Ignatius.
Oh, then it's actually Ignatius
Yeah,
himself,
Saint
they're not,
Ignatius
it's not
wrote that.
transliteration, okay,
No.
it's
Yeah,
actual
he
word.
wrote that. Well, in Spanish, and so it's a translation.
Right, okay, but it's
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
okay, not changed.
No, it's not changed. The third is of spiritual consolation. I call it consolation when some interior movement is caused in the soul, through which the soul comes to be inflamed with love of its Creator and Lord, and consequently, when it can love no created thing on the face of the earth in itself, but only in the Creator of them all. Likewise, when it sheds tears that move to love of its Lord, whether out of sorrow for sins, or for the passion of Christ our Lord, or because of other things directly ordered to his service and praise. Finally, I call consolation every increase of hope, faith, and charity, and all interior joy that calls and attracts to heavenly things and to the salvation of one's soul, quieting it and giving it peace in its Creator and Lord. Now this consolation, spiritual consolation, is coming from God himself. And there is non-spiritual consolation and spiritual consolation. And so there's this little episode in St. Teresa's life where she was in the yard and she saw this little chicken just scratching around in the yard, and all these little chicks were around it. And it's an animal example, so of course I'm giving it. But then some noise startled the chicken, and so she made all this peeping, and all her little chicks just gathered under her. She lifted up her wings and she gathered all the little chicks. And just seeing that little scene, it just made her smile, and that was a non-spiritual consolation. It just made her feel good to see that. But then the more she thought of it, she thought of Scripture, and she thought of Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus said, "How I long to gather you up, like a mother hen gathers her chicks." And then it drew her to God's love for her and for everyone. And so that little moment moved from non-spiritual consolation to spiritual consolation. And when we look at non-spiritual consolation, that's like ice cream, maybe lying on the beach, friendships, falling in love, the joys that we get from our work. And that consolation ends when the activity ends. And then we have spiritual consolation, and it's always involves the Trinity. There is an endurance of that consolation in our heart. We remember it, we go back to it. It's not caused by us. We're not responsible for this consolation. It's always a gift from God. Consolation is always the effect of being loved by God. This is what God does. He loves, and the soul is affected by his love. We are warmed, we are comforted, and sometimes this will make us shed tears. I'm sure we've all felt that consolation in relation to God.
Sorry, another question.
Yeah.
So, if something transforms when it's in our lives, so obviously an ice cream on the beach, but, friendships or things like that, things that have more quality to them. If something transformative happens and it becomes more of a spiritual or consolation, is that to say then that it was always intended by God to be a spiritual consolation, or is it the
Maybe it's something that
act of
grew
will
into
that
it. It
changes
might have grown into it.
Okay, it might have grown. So
Yeah.
it's
So
possible
you might
that
have-
non-spiritual can
You
go
might,
into
yeah, because you might have a friend, and over time, that friendship grows more spiritual. It becomes a spiritual friendship, and so maybe it becomes more focused on God. Maybe you get consolation out of that friendship because it makes you think more of God rather read Psalm 103. That is spiritual consolation. It's my favorite psalm. I sometimes give it in confession, so if you come to confession, you may get it. It's a beautiful psalm. Desolation. Now God always gives us consolation. God does not give us desolation, but He does permit it sometimes. So God always gives consolation, and He permits desolation. Now if we read Psalm 103 and we don't believe it, then we're probably in desolation. And an example of desolation would be Peter sinking in the water, and he calls out to God, "Save me." The fourth rule is of spiritual desolation. I call desolation all the contrary of the third rule, such as darkness of soul, disturbance in it, movement to low and earthly things, disquiet from various agitations and temptations, moving to lack of confidence, without hope, without love, finding oneself totally slothful, tepid, sad, and as if separated from one's Creator and Lord. For just as consolation is contrary to desolation, in the same way the thoughts that come from consolation are contrary to the thoughts that come from desolation. So this previous chapter that we just read in Martin, that's about desolation, all those trials that we have. And from those trials, we try to grow in faith and hope and love, and maybe one of those virtues specifically. Now, there is non-spiritual desolation, which might be a physical sickness, or loneliness, or a grief, or difficulty. And with these, we go to the doctor, we're prudent about them, we attend to them, we try to see if there's something that we can do humanly possible. Now sometimes those non-spiritual desolations can lead to spiritual desolations if we ignore them. Sometimes a sickness may, when you look at the saints and they get sick, they go to the doctor, but they don't let it affect their relationship with God. They don't let it drag them down. When you say Bernadette, I'll use her as the example. I mean, she was very sick. She had tuberculosis in the bone, and she was very painful all the time. But when you visited her, it was very rare that you would see her give in to that pain, or she would never make anyone feel badly that came in to visit her. She just wouldn't let sickness affect her that way. Even though she suffered greatly from it, she wouldn't let it bring her into spiritual desolation. Sometimes they both go together. Some people will have spiritual desolation along with the sickness. And so it's not always easy. It's always not cut and dried. It does take some discernment.
I guess my thought is many people, well, okay, Rule 4 only applies to people that are moving toward God. We can't necessarily say, apply it to general population if
Well,
people don't believe.
all the rule 2 and all the way to 14, that applies to God, people that are moving towards God. So people in desolation can still be moving towards God, and they still want to move towards God. Is that what you were asking?
I just wanted to, make a comment. I think there's just a lot of people in our culture that are, suffering from this It's spiritual desolation.
Yeah.
This is all I'm
Now, Job would be
Yeah.
total desolation for a
Yeah.
long time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we could see from there that he was still
And his
adamant
friends,
with his faith in God, even
right,
though.
right, and his friends tried to tell him that he had sinned in some way, and that's why he was suffering, but he wouldn't go along with that. And I think we do that sometimes when somebody is suffering, we try to give an answer, and so we should be careful about that, be very cautious, discerning, if we try to say, oh, you're suffering because of X, Y, and Z. Just be very careful about that.
We'd probably be better to stick to the non-spiritual side of it, saying you're suffering because you
Yeah.
haven't gone to the doctor.
Yeah, we go to the doctor. We'll see. Now, during desolation, the enemy always makes false claims to us about the past. And he says, oh, there's only darkness in the future. And the enemy always feeds us this sense of hopelessness. And so God permits these desolations or temptations for our own holiness and our salvation. And even in these desolations, God still gives himself. And it's usually in a way that we don't understand at first. It's a mystery. God enfolds me in his grace and his love, even in this midst of desolation. That sometimes in desolation, we might tend to focus on ourselves, and we get absorbed in that, and we forget that we have a Father in heaven. And there's a little prayer that I wrote down that was written by someone in desolation. It just says, Father, I can't feel your presence, it hurts, but you are still my Father. You are still my number one. I beg you, give me what I need. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, you're going away from God. 2, you're going to God. 3, it's all roses and puppies and candy. As long as it's focused on God. And then rule 4, it's desolation. You don't feel God. You don't feel God.
Father, now, an overview of the purpose of these rules.
These rules, they will help us. We can go to the rules, and you'll see later on, like when you're in desolation, it will say, don't do this, do this. And we'll get to the rules later on,
So
because
it's
each
maybe like a
rule.
flow chart, if you can find out what rule you're falling under,
Yeah,
then
and
there's
then
further
it's
guidance.
usually good to do this with a spiritual director, because sometimes it helps to have this second point of view. And so if you're in desolation, you follow these steps, X, Y, Z. If you're in consolation, you follow these steps, X, Y, and Z.
And I
so
suppose it's somewhat fluid,
Yeah.
like it's not a progression that you go from.
You're
Literally.
gonna jump around in the rules your whole life. You're not gonna stay in one rule your whole life.
Or even proceed in.
Yeah,
In
it's
order.
not, yeah. It'll make more sense.
Isn't that kind of like what David talked about, being on the mountain and then in the valleys?
Yeah, and with David too, I mean, he had Uriah killed, so he was in rule 1 for a while. But then he felt that sting of conscience, and he repented, and he moved to rule 2 again. So I mean, David's a good example. What's that? Yeah. I'm thinking Absalom, so I was.
Father, how can you tell a difference between desolation and depression?
Sometimes you can. Sometimes, so that's why you go to the doctor, and you get your physical symptoms examined. try to do everything humanly possible, because if it is depression, then hopefully medicine will pick that up and that flaw will live. Yeah, so you try to, we use our reason. If there's any physical ailment, we try to get that treated. Yeah, it would be hard to tell. Time for your break.
I gotta go to the bathroom.